Good evening. The title of this evening's Dharma talk is Earth Day, Mountains and Rivers. So it's still question and answers, but we give it the name Earth Day to give it some atmosphere, you could say. So there can be questions around that if you like, or around anything. Earth just basically means ground, dirt. It could mean bhumi, or in reference to the 10 grounds of the Bodhisattva path. Bodhisattva, bhumis, or grounds. But any question is appropriate.
Sokuzan has a question.
Certainly.
What's the difference between intuition and feelings?
Mm-hmm. So a feeling is going to have a lot of different dimensions to it. Just the feeling on the tip of your fingers, the feeling of your body form, all the receptors there, nerve endings. Nerve endings seem to show up in various ways in all of the sense fields, including the mind. So intuition may be operating in a different way than feeling. Feeling is something that can show up that is dependently arisen and quite often is mixed up with hope and fear, with the wish for things to be different, and subtle preferences about things. When I say subtle, I mean that you don't even know you have that preference, but you won't allow anything else into your mind stream because you are shut down in that area because of fear. So this is what the sitting practice of meditation begins to open up that dimension by just continuing to look at walls of the mind. So whereas intuition could show up in a lot of ways. So I don't have the dictionary definition in front of me, but to intuit something is to have, you could say, some kind of a hunch about it. It might be a more common way of talking about it. But also just an understanding, and that there could be attendant feelings there. But I think you can have intuition about something without any particular feeling dynamic in tow. And further questions about that are fine if you have them. You could refine more what it is you're wanting to know by asking it a different way.
Junchu asks, how does solidity help us see space?
It looks like it's just a contrast between what seems to be solid. There's the solidity of the earth. Solid. There's a solidity that we form psychologically, emotionally, spiritually, conceptually. We shrink down into this is it. That's my opinion. A form of solidity happening in the mind stream and the awareness. So I think there again, it's the contrast, and the way we look at that with our sitting practice of meditation is look at the contrast rather than do something about it, rather than try to get rid of the solidity or try to create more space. Space is already the case. We just tend to cover it up with stuff.
She has another question.
Certainly.
Is our memory affected by awareness? It feels that my memory gets worse the more I practice.
It's probably more like you're remembering more how forgetful you are, or you're more aware of not being able to keep all the things lined up that you would like. It's just an idea about it. I have no idea for sure, but I would say that it might show up more clearly to you if you just contemplate that somewhat. This doesn't mean think about it. Contemplating it just means that just be open in that area. Just open up in that area rather than notice the conclusion about it. As soon as you say you're forgetful, you stop looking at that situation. And if you remember you're forgetful, then that isn't exactly forgetfulness. More about that if you haven't, or whatever. There's 23 people here, so there should be some questions.
Yes, Nicole has a question.
Nicole, go ahead.
How can you meet people where they are at without getting pulled down to their level?
So the idea of you get pulled down to their level means that you have established some kind of a identity that has a certain level to it, where you are before you even meet them. You're already feeling like you're above them. I'm not talking about a kind of vanity. I'm just saying that you're maintaining some kind of equilibrium, it seems. And you notice when you talk to certain people that are difficult or challenging, or are challenging your apparent laissez-faire attitude, or not having any opinions, which you might have opinions, you might not. You might have an understanding that isn't necessarily an opinion. It's just more of an understanding of how things are functioning. And so you meet them where they're at, not by going down to their level, which I know you already realize that, but rather seeing deeply. If you look deeply here and you see that your own dynamic, your own identity is tied up with success and failure, right and wrong, up and down, back and forth, hope and fear, all of those polarities. This is what the sitting practice of meditation does. It helps you to see through those. And if you just do it bravely, you could say, eventually those things start to collapse because they are maintained through hope and fear. Wanting this, not wanting that. Pride and shame. That's another one that's very sneaky. Some people are in the shame area most of the time. If they do get a little prideful, they become ashamed of it. And then other people are in the pride area all the time. And if something somehow cracks through that and lets a little light of reality in there, they suddenly feel very shameful, rather than just more aware, less me, more all of this. So when you meet someone who is, as you're talking about, if I gather or understand what you're saying, someone is at a low level of thinking, petty mind, it's accusing and blaming and mixing it up in terms of right and wrong, who's right, who's wrong, they shouldn't do that, we shouldn't do that, who do they think they are, and those kinds of things. Just receive. If you're training your mind, then there's a much less of a likelihood you'll get contaminated by that, because it's so clear. It's not that it won't be uncomfortable. I'm sure it would be uncomfortable, but I don't think you have to particularly worry about it. One of the ways that that'll show up is you might feel drawn into it to some extent, like you want to fight, but if you don't hook up your vocal cords and you don't and you're very aware of your body language, this doesn't mean you stop yourself from moving around. You're just aware of the body language. So any body language that shows up relative to how you feel, how you think, won't necessarily be an automatic, obvious participation in the gang war that's going on in front of you. So therefore, you can just be present. It may not be authentic presence right away, but it will be authentic presence right away. You just won't know it. More about that is good. If you have it, it's a good question. A lot of room to discuss that or address people's understanding, misunderstanding, or clarity about it for that reason. For that.
Sokuzan has a follow-up on intuition.
Yes.
He asks, does intuition show up in the thought consciousness?
I would say that it does, but it isn't just pure concept of this is right and that's wrong. It's not a logical kind of thing. I think it shows up in there because it can show up in the form of concepts. It can follow a trail of concepts. It's following a trail of consciousness that could be flooded with concepts, but there could be a whole lot of sparkles in between those concepts. There could be some kind of spaciousness there, where there's a definite thought process around something, for or against or in between. But there's a lot of room in there, and sometimes that shows up as a sense of humor. We notice that we have a conceptual agreement with some aspect of our life of reality, but it wouldn't necessarily show up as we're not really sure of it. It's more like we're sure of it, but there's something quite funny about the security we establish. So we begin to have a little bit of fun with our tendency to want to lock down on things. This can happen in lots of areas. This can happen in the person who is full of fear. We can be something's kind of humorous about that fear that's just coming out of nowhere. Or the artificial confidence or contraction into some kind of an opinion or concept can be you can kind of notice that we're fixated on that. It's kind of humorous. Same way for other dimensions, other intense pride can, a little bit of light breaks through that, it's possible. Or the shame or the darkness, I'm never going to get this right. I'm ashamed of my thought patterns or my activities and so on. A little bit of humor rises. The phenomena would show up impersonally as just space, but then the personal kind of connection with that might be humorous. Not just like ha-ha funny, but just humorous. Not taking ourselves quite so seriously as a common way, as it's said.
Shoto has a question.
Yes.
He asks, can we live in a samyak or complete way if we don't understand who we are or what this is?
Here it comes. That's the only way you can do that. That's the only way. When I say that, I'm not trying to be funny. I'm just saying that, can we do that without? I'm saying there's no knower of that. The knowledge might show up, but first the knower of that, the identity that knows this and knows that and doesn't know that, that has to be seen through. So there may be some area in which that comes up in different combinations that you can't track for this person or that person. So when I say that's the only way, I'm saying that some kind of a not knowing, which could be called surrender. I'm not going to call it that, because then the ego takes up that little placard and says, I'm going to surrender. That way I'll get included. If I can figure out a way to look like I'm surrendering, not to the teacher, because I know the teacher is going to know that I'm not surrendering, but if I could look that way to myself, then when I did function in front of the teacher, I'd be so convinced myself that the teacher would start to think that every now and then people will send me experiences they're having so that I get the chance to say, nope. Go back to the cushion. You're not one of them, by the way. Those are people off in the distance.
Kozan has a question. As it regards just observing, what is the difference between the awareness and the view from the reference point called I?
Paraphrase. Just say it. Just ask the question in a different way. And if you can not say what's the difference between, then it might help. It might help getting a much deeper response rather than just me giving you the difference between them, which you already know. Paraphrase.
Sato has a question. How do we act responsibly for or towards the planet when we can never see all the causes and effects of whatever we do?
Very good. Right here. This is the planet. You are this. And I don't mean the fancy you are the world kind of thing, that kind of romanticism around it. I'm saying your kneecap hurting in the morning, that's the planet. Your mind, your neighbor or your friend or your enemy for that matter, doing something, someone on television or anywhere else, doing something that disturbs or upsets or causes a reaction. Like earlier, Nicole was saying, how do you meet people where they're at without getting dragged down into that? That's the only way you can do it. Just go into it, and then just be very. If you're training the mind, you can be very aware, very very aware of that spirit sword. You can be very aware of how that functions, and when I'm saying this, I'm saying how we're going down and connecting with the earth, and we don't really want to do that because it may be uncomfortable. It's easier to just do it conceptually by, not that you're doing this, but by barking at the TV or working within political systems and so on. Not that that shouldn't be done, but it might be a really good idea to spend a lot of time training the mind so that you don't make those areas more difficult.
Carl has a question.
Is Sokuzan going to paraphrase that question or not?
I'm doing other questions first.
Huh? Okay, do other, but come back to that because she needs to.
She hasn't yet.
What's the difference between me paraphrasing that question and me not paraphrasing that question? She could ask me that. Go ahead, Carl.
Is the earth a sentient being?
Are you a sentient being? That might be, and I'm not kidding you. Are you a sentient being? Is the earth a sentient being? Of course it is. Is celery a sentient being? Of course it is. Is a piece of pink granite a sentient being? Yes. Just because it can't move or bark or doesn't have teeth or a mommy doesn't mean it is not fundamentally valuable. We can't leave anything out. Include. If you want to practice, include. If you want to continue on the tilt-a-whirl, then exclude. And it's amazing. We're actually free in the sense that we're free and well favored, as it said in the four reminders that turn the mind towards the Dharma. First, contemplate the preciousness of being free, value of being free and well favored, the value of being free and well favored. Free to join this, free to move about, to have a job, to have a family, to isolate yourself from this contagious, and well favored in that we're not necessarily buying into what's commonly sometimes called the herd mentality. That's always against that or always for this. You don't need any of that. Don't join anything. I don't offer any. Sewing a rocks is your business. I'm more likely to stop you from doing it rather than try to convince you to do it. So live your own life. Be genuine. Be genuine. This doesn't mean you shouldn't respect something that someone created called Earth Day. But that the corporations are all over that. The huge monsters that masquerade as sentient beings. So it's a difficult area because we want to help. We want to save the oceans. But then the ones who are funding all of those. If you happen to see that, what was the movie again?
Planet of the Humans.
Planet of the Humans. Don't miss that movie. Michael Moore was the executive producer, although someone else did it. So it's fairly low key for the force of what is being exposed there. Not particularly painful to look at as a documentary. Doesn't have really sickening, soupy kind of, I want you to feel this way kind of music in it. If it does, then not very much. Would you say?
Chisho has a question.
I know Chisho. Isn't that Wisdom Hammer? Yeah.
He says,
Who gave him that name?
Ironically, leading with awareness seems to require a lot of conscious effort. Is that how it's supposed to feel?
Yep. And of course, that's going to show up as how much you want to think about everything first. It's much easier to lead with the thinking because we've done it so many times and we have grooves, just like we have grooves in the brain. We have grooves or paths that it's easier just to go on that path, just habit patterns, habitual patterns. But if you lead with your awareness, then it's not that the habitual patterns won't have a dynamic that's very similar called dependent origination. Of course it will. But it will not be the dependent origination that you have reconditioned yourself to over and over and over again through habit that causes you to go follow in the same old grooves of cause and effect that we call karma, personal karma. Whereas if you're leading with your awareness, you might find yourself actually going in different directions because thinking process, that paranoid or hope and fear aspect of the mind is still there. We're not going to get rid of anything. We don't want to necessarily exclude that, but it's not going to particularly be in the driver's seat or being interpreting what the map says or giving advice to that open dimension. That is just a sense of beingness, sometimes called authentic presence. There's no one particularly there. If there is someone there, then it's not authentic. It's a masquerade.
Jinshu has another question.
Please.
She asks, how can we examine an area where shame shows up when it feels very painful?
Yeah. I just think it's a matter of persistence and don't set a deadline on it. Just, you could say it like, I'm going to continue to work with this. You need to say that to yourself. If I never have any success, I'm going to continue to work with that. And know that if you're doing that and being genuine and working with that difficulty or that quality of negativity that can arise, it's like being covered with soot right in the middle of taking a shower. It's difficult. I would say do it anyway. And not too big of a deal to yourself. This doesn't mean it doesn't hurt like hell or feel really uncomfortable or painful or nauseating or any other word that you could come up with that might have a negative meaning. But looking for results is the thing because when you look for results, you've actually taken your mind or your awareness or your intention away from the work that is to be done, which is what? Be aware. Awareness. Big fat word, awareness.
Sokuzan has another question.
Certainly.
Is intuition pointing in the same area as bodhicitta?
I would say, insofar as I understand what you're asking me, I would say so. Relative bodhicitta is more like something you're endeavoring to do. Try to of the two, keep the principal witness, drive all blames into one. The Tonglen practice or Maitri Bhavana practice. If you happen to be involved in something along that line, where it actually has an up and down or polarized kind of way of working with it, and then absolute bodhicitta is expressed in different ways. Always remain a child of illusion. So everything is seen as unreal, absolute.
Nicole has another question.
Yes, Nicole.
How do you put others first without abandoning yourself in the process?
So do a little bit. It doesn't have to be something that shows up to others where others are noticing how you're putting others before yourself or you're getting a credential for it. But do a little bit. And reflect on the idea of who you are and what's happening there. You have to do this yourself. I mean, you can do it with the support of the teachings, the support of the teacher. But it's something you really need to look at. And the way in which I'm hearing you ask the question, I'm saying do a little bit of each. Take care of yourself so that you're healthy enough, you're you're open or free enough, so that when you do run into these people who drag you down, you have a little bit of a ballast there. And that, my understanding, and I'm very biased in this area, the only way you're going to get the ballast is to look at the imbalance. Sit down, hold still, look at the wall, and receive the negativity, because the negativity that comes to you when you hold very still and just observe is negativity that has been, you could say, bottled up for a while. And if you still have that and you haven't dealt with it directly, in other words, been aware of it, just acknowledge it and to get rid of it, then when you run into the negativity that brings up the question of the idea of the bodhisattva, putting others before yourself, pretty damn hard to put yourself ahead of somebody who's being an ass. I'm not saying that. We're just saying the way you would put that person, and I'll have to tell a little story about it. The way you'd have to take that situation and put that person before yourself is rather than attaching to how rotten you feel about it being around that person because they're such a pain. You could spend a little bit of that. Doesn't have to be a lot. Just a little finger snap of that, saying this person is suffering. This is their way of getting rid of suffering without even knowing it, by putting it on you. Here, trip over that. Here, trip over that. Here, taste of that. You know exactly what I'm saying. This doesn't mean cave into them. You could do it for 30 seconds and say, excuse me, I got something else to do. But you could give a little bit of reception to that situation without overdoing it, so that the person actually interprets that as you're afraid of them, or you don't know what to think, how to think yourself. So that's why you're being intimidated by them. Keep a sharp edge. And that sharp edge would have two sides to it. One would be for them and one would be for you. In other words, save all beings, be with all things. There's no one to be with all things. There's no one that can actually do that. But how we experience that is how polarized that someone can, you could say, cause us to feel just by their crazy activity. Suddenly we feel like, I can't be around this person. I'm going to get sucked down into this, like you were saying earlier. So take your time. You're a young person, have a whole lifetime. Unless death comes without warning. Just don't want to drag you down after I say that. A little sense of humor won't hurt.
Shoka has a question.
Yes.
He asks, what is our business when sewing a raksu or okesa?
So if you're sewing a raksu, or the lay precepts, getting ready to receive the lay precepts called jukai, when you're sewing that, your only business is to repeat the refuge formula. I take refuge in the Buddha. I take refuge in the Dharma. I take refuge in the Sangha, over and over and over again as you're stitching. That's your business. Anything else that comes in or crowds in or elbows its way in, don't push it out. Just notice it. Just be aware. It's aware. Awareness. It's aware. You're aware of that coming in. But you still continue to say the refuge. If you say that refuge enough, you know you can have fantastic daydreams right at the same time you're saying refuge. You just daydream. And again, it's not about correcting that. It's about being aware of it. Didn't know you could do that. It's not multitasking. It might be multi-sewing.
Shoka then asks, what about when wearing one?
Put others before yourself. Without buying into manipulation. If you see really clearly the way you work with your own mind, your own confusion, you see it so deeply that you begin to see that there's no solid being there that's doing that, then the karma that brought you into this life will still begin to rotate around and do this and do that and like this, dislike that, but there's no solid being there. That's what's so amazing about it. Is you begin by seeing there's no solid self, even though you continue to function in different ways that look like you're just as much hung up on your thoughts as everybody else. People project on you what they can't see in themselves. Same thing with a robe, only the robe is just you've got yourself deeper in the trench of Dharma.
Kyun asks, does meditations...
No. You mean the people all getting together to have an Earth Day meditation? Well, it probably wouldn't hurt. And of course, I don't mean to mock anyone at all or for it to show up that way. People should do what they need to do. Some people, that's the only way people know how to work with meditation or awareness practice or anything is to have some kind of a goal. There'll be a few of those people doing that, just like there's people teaching all kinds of things, assuming that meditation is about improvement or getting better or being more peaceful. It may be more peaceful, but if you do it as the intention, then you're buying into the materialism, manipulation of the mind into something better.
Katie asks, what if I am the one being an ass?
All the better. Finally, you're admitting it. So, and don't correct that too fast. Be aware of it, but watch going into some kind of apology about it. Now, I'm not saying that if you offend someone by saying something that was off color or just kind of came tumbling out, that you couldn't say, "Oops, I'm sorry. I should know better than to say that to you." And that's the end of it. Apologize once. If you apologize twice, that's more about wanting forgiveness. Apologizing once means it's not merchandising. You don't need to get paid back. You said something, you'd say, "Let me have that back, please. Sorry that came tumbling out." Apologize for that. Apologize once. Apologize twice, and it's more about, so aren't you going to forgive me? I'm really, really sorry. I've said over and over how sorry I am. I'm really sorry.
Trisho has another question.
Mm-hmm.
He asks, what does leading with awareness dependently co-arise with?
So codependent idea or co-emergent would be the awareness part is wisdom, and anything could arise with it. Confusion can rise with it. It co-emerges, so the wisdom comes out, the confusion or the delusion come out, not separate. If you live in picking and choosing, I don't care how brilliant you are, not just you, but I don't care how high an IQ or how many Jordan Petersons you've got plugged into your iPad. Nothing against Jordan Peterson, brilliant man. But I'm just saying that way of working with it is about having a really tight control of all of the rubber bands we call intellect. Very, very tight. So you can actually, anytime you want, you can squeeze out a response that anyone else has trouble coming back with if they're operating on your particular rugby field. It's not a game. So co-emergent is confusion and wisdom arise together. Can't be any other way. Wisdom doesn't arise and conquer confusion. Confusion is wisdom. If you don't see that, then you'll have internal warfare. Not just you, you show, perhaps that will never show up for you in the way that I'm describing. But for some people, they're highly, highly at war with themselves. They don't want to be confused, and so they fight with it, and they'll blame others, and they'll not only meditate to get rid of it, they'll medicate to get rid of it in lots of different ways. That's why the awareness practice is so powerful. Whether you're wearing a raksu, a robe, or particularly consider yourself a student of Buddhism, if you're listening to me and I say train your mind, you might need a bunch of other things to help you do that. Like the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha could be helpful, yes.
Kozan has paraphrased her question with 2 questions.
I don't want it now. Never mind. Yeah, go ahead.
What is it that is aware? That's the first part. And then what is awareness?
Awareness, well, we have to use concepts. So the only thing I can say is awareness is aware, but there's no individual there. In terms of the Bodhisattva vow, the awareness can congeal into a really intense individual if you need a whack on the head, and they can pick up the kotsu and go after you with it. And awareness can also congeal or condense or show up as a very biased opinion or personality, or you know what I'm talking about. You've seen that happen over here. But there's no solid being there. Now, sometimes one of the ways that Trungpa Rinpoche would talk about that with using anger, he said it's anger without hatred. It's just the Indian sage of the past century, Nisargadatta Maharaj, when his book I Am That. He's quite a sweetheart in that book, but if you read the later runs when he was getting ready to die, when he became famous and people started to come there and come into his little beady shack and go upstairs and watch him smoke beaties, and then they would come in there with their jargon or whatever, and he'd fly off the handle at them. But he wasn't mad at them.
Wendy has a question.
Yes.
She asks, how can I tell the difference between the natural cessation or change of an emotion and ignorance or pushing away of an emotion?
Okay, so here's, I'll use a metaphor here. I'll use an image. What you're asking me is your awareness. But what you're asking me is, how will I know the difference between right and left when I get to the crossroads? It's like that. It'll be that clear to you. But until that time, don't look for a crossroads. Don't look for either one of those, because when you do that, you take you stop moving on the road, on the path. Just receive what's happening. If nothing's happening, then just receive that. If no polarity is showing up, just receive that. Just be there, be alone. Be lonely if that shows up. Have an understanding that doesn't grasp or reject. Not looking for anything, not ignoring anything, not grasping, not rejecting. And at some juncture, more than likely, those very things you're asking about, just because you're bringing them up, those are going to show up, and you will know. You will know, but you won't know if you're always searching for right and wrong, up and down, back and forth, before you get to it, because you want to know conceptually. This is one of the band-aids, or one of the shields, one of the protectors of the ego mind, that it wants to know what's going to happen before it happens. It wants to know what to do when I get to the crossroad. How will I know right from left? How will I know this way from that way? I'm saying, if you're training your mind and there's a willingness to watch whatever rises, observe whatever occurs, observe whatever goes to the left, whatever goes to the right, just observe. And when it's time where you, as a parent person, a woman here, you'll know. And you could call that intuition. I don't use that word, but you could use that word. the word I would use is choiceless. There's no choice. If you come to a fork in the road, uh, you find you just see that you go this way instead of that way. But you don't stop at the fork and think, what should I do? I can't make a mistake here. What if I go, I can't do that because there's no reverse. So that would say, sit more before you get to the fork. Actually, there isn't any fork. There aren't any forks. Just a lot of bends and twists and turns. If you see a fork, you're wrong.
Nicole has another question.
Nicole?
You've told me before when I get overwhelmed and emotional on the cushion to say, thank you very much. I have no complaints. What is that doing?
So it's just a way of working with the negativity instead of just trying to wrestle with it or struggle with it or tamp it down or explain or figure out why it's even happening. Or instead, you just whatever the negativity is, thank you very much. I have no complaints whatsoever. It's treating it like a teaching. It's like the teaching image or situation comes up, and in order to really connect with that attitude, which is you need to be inspired to be able to even do that. There are people I might say that to, or that would have no interest in that. Well, that's ridiculous. Why would I do that? I do have complaints, and I want satisfaction out of this. Whereas a practitioner, you may be giving things more the benefit of the doubt. So you say, thank you very much. I have no complaints whatsoever. At the same time, you do have a complaint, but you're change. It's Atisha's 7 points of mind training. One of them that would fit that is change your attitude and relax as it is. So change your attitude. Just walk right in your attitude, walk right in and change it, and then relax. It's almost like you were saying, and this may work sometime to actually produce some kind of relative and temporary result, but just don't get angry. The ninth precept in grave precept is, I believe I have it right, is don't get angry. That doesn't mean, that it's a rule. You never can get angry. It's about observing, as my teacher, Kobenji Roshi, told me so many years ago. You don't take precepts. You just observe them.
Juzan has another question.
Yes.
Is relating to other without merchandising awakening?
Well, it's not awakening, but it's a path, has a path quality to it. So they're still on the path. Pretty soon there's something that I mention occasionally, but I don't teach. It's called the 10 Bhumis. And of course, I think you're going to be studying, or you're starting to study the myth of freedom. And Trungpa Rinpoche has a very interesting way of talking about the Bhumis. He's quite creative. I don't think he has a chapter on each one. He kind of flips back and forth between them. But that might give you some idea around that, how that could slowly have a path quality to it. There's kind of a development that can't be particularly structured as a series of term papers or something, or SAT scores or something like that. But it's some kind of understanding where the understanding, because you've been willing to go deep into that material called the mind, your mind, without grasping, rejecting, or shutting down, we begin to see that open dimension, beginning of wisdom, prajna. Prajna starts to happen immediately. The first bhumi is seeing there's no solid being. That's a pretty astonishing thing to see. There's still a lot of work to be done.
Junshu has another question.
Yes.
On the Open Heart Project today, you gave an example of a gang member joining a gang to get some semblance of inclusion or affection they've never had before. How can we see something we've never experienced before?
So the assumption is that is that experience is just this body, mind here, but it's much more deep and spread out than just our own personal experience. So it's just like you don't have to teach, like with Rumi, you don't have to teach him. You can see he already knows a whole lot of things. He just can't express it in words yet, but he's already functioning as a getting his identity from how things he wants that he can't get, things that he wants that he can get, and his and you take care of him enough, you could probably see that, see a deep understanding of the very question you're asking by just watching him, and see how he functions to get what he wants and how he tries to manipulate his mom and dad. And don't you? Further questions, okay. I didn't really say as much as I could have said about that. If you personalize it some, maybe.
Don has a question.
Yes, Don.
Just as we are able to hear when we are asleep, can we also receive without awareness?
I think the natural state is to receive. So just receiving. You go to sleep, you just receive your dreams. There might be some characterization or character that shows up as you in the dream that might be resisting, a dream resistor in a dream world. Lots of things can show up in that area that are very fascinating and curious about how dreams work.
Karen from New Zealand,
Tupton.
Is there more you can say about saying you are needed elsewhere after you've been with the situation for a while? For example, it would seem difficult if you were in lockdown with your family and there's a disagreement going on or going down they want you to be part of. To say you are needed elsewhere when there isn't really anywhere else to go and nothing that is time related that needs you, such as a work call, feels inauthentic.
Well, I think, Tupton, I think you just need to be creative. I've met you. There's no lacking in intelligence in you. I think you just need to be creative and look at the boundary, look at the space, look at the number of people, or look at what people are doing. Try to understand what it is they're really looking forward for when they're trying to get your agreement, and see if you can help them in that way rather than give them that substitute that they want to come up with. Give them the attention. Sometimes people just want the attention, so you can show them some respect. You're not showing respect for the content, but you're showing respect for their Buddha nature, their fundamental nature that you can see. You see your own, you can see others. And if you do, if the seduction to join in with the crew there, and what do you think about the person we're going to kill today? Those kinds of things. What do you think about these things that we think are true that are actually lies? Things like that. You can find a way to get a break from that. Go for a walk. As I sometimes say, I don't often say it on YouTube, but I'm saying precepts should be observed, not obeyed. So there are times when the best thing you can do to really help someone in the situation is to be creative. In other words, lie. If you're lying to help someone, if you're saying something that is untrue to fundamentally help that situation, it probably isn't going to happen often. But there are times when you really need to say, I've got a letter I've got to write, or I've got some emails I have to take care of. And even though if you went in the other room, probably wouldn't be doing emails. But a little bit of that, and that allows you, it gives you a little bit of room there. So it's very situational. If your intention is around being helpful, your intention is around not contributing to the explosive matter explosive material that people are shredding and burning in front of you and want you to join in because you're part of the family. It's not going to help to go to war with that. I'm sure you already know. I sense that by your question. But you could bow out. You can find a way. You could actually find a way without bowing. Just stand up. Use your body language. Stand up. Look around at everybody and say, I got to get moving. and then just turn around and leave. And then go to your room if you have one. If you don't, get one. Get a room. You must have a meditation space. If you have any kind of a place where it's isolated, where you can get away from the entire situation you're calling your family or your household. So again, as I said, I'm not saying you should lie every time, but sometimes you might have to be a little bit in that direction because the people are not ready. You have to meet people where they're at, and if they're not ready for the actual truth, and and they're not ready for that, because the truth would be, telling them, I think you guys are all nuts, and I don't want to be in this room with you. You want to be truthful. I mean, that kind of truthfulness isn't going to be helpful to somebody. It might be just better to say, I got to get going. I got to have something else I have to do. Which, if they bug you about it, say it's get away from you guys. So, I mean, you have to be creative with it and keep a sense of humor. And I think if your sense of humor is up there, which I've met you, I know you have one, and then you just look at it. And every situation will be different. Be very wary of coming up with a protocol for how you're always going to do that, because that will show up as to that person, or that situation, as some kind of deception or disrespect. And you're not going to be able to help people if they feel like you're deceiving them or tricking them.
Joseph has a question. What are the misunderstandings of hope and fear as they manifest in the environmental movement?
Well, we hope for something better, and then we stop looking at it. As soon as you buy into hope, which is easy to do, the Green New Deal, or green, just the color green, that's fishy stuff. I thought it was fishy when Trungpa Rinpoche talked about green energy in terms of donating to the Sangha or something he used. I think it's in The Heart of the Buddha. He talks about green energy, and also kind of validates drinking alcohol too, which is a little creepy. Even when I read it, I thought, what's up with this, Rinpoche? But I never got a chance to ask him that. So it's about being aware of that. We're not saying we shouldn't try to do something about the planet, but if you investigate this, like this documentary I was just mentioning, it's not only that, but all kinds of people trying to, like these huge propellers that catch the wind, are incredibly expensive and burn a lot of coal to be able to build those things.
Kozan has another question.
Certainly.
These 6 senses seem intensely personal. How can we relax in the seemingly hardwired grip of self-reference?
Yeah. Practice. And that you're able to ask that question tells me that maybe you're thinking it's just about other people, but I think you're seeing that it's also about yourself. It's about just observing that. Do not do surgery. No correcting. This is the misunderstanding that this is what gets sold. Meditate this way and you'll get this. Want to be peaceful? Do this. Want to attain enlightenment? Follow this path. Pay me this much money, or whatever. Just observe. And observe the very thing you described as how, when you said how we do it, just do more of what you just did in order to come up with that question, because what you're doing is you're looking at something that is extremely complicated, very sensitive in areas, and has a kind of structure to it that is, I have to invent this word because I don't know what else to use. There probably is one that I just can't recall, but unfigure-outable. You can't find the loose end where you can unthread that, because it's been that way since beginningless time. Human beings, starting with Australopithecus or whomever, up through baboons and all kinds of human-like beings. Just train the mind. Sit down, hold everything still that you can, and watch that elaboration keep tying itself up. And if you're trying to figure it out, you're covering it up. If you're trying to blame something or find the fundamental cause for it, not a good idea. Circular. because you'll find just enough to suck you into another route down another rabbit hole, as they say in Alice in Wonderland. You keep going down rabbit holes. So just stay on the surface. Look at the surface. The depth you're looking for is right in the surface. It's called a mirror.
Sokurin has a question.
Sokuzan.
Can one be a bodhisattva and not have compassion for the suffering of beings?
Absolutely. That's how you become a bodhisattva. Because the other kind of bodhisattva, the kind that thinks it cares about all beings and wants to look like a bodhisattva, this is just a highly polished form of narcissism. To fundamentally help others may not even show up. And to be able to do that for others needs to be done with each person. Your way of doing this needs to be yours, with the help of the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. You're sewing a robe. Was that Sokuzan? Yeah, Sokuzan. You're sewing a robe. I think it's all sewn, and it's just a matter of being ordained as a monk. And I've never sensed any. I'm not saying you haven't had it, but I've never sensed any doubt about doing that from you from the time you asked me about it. When I sense doubt, we stop right there. I'm not going to have anybody sewing a robe if they have doubts. But your question is totally valid. It just tells me you're looking exactly what you need to look at. Don't stop.
Jiyuzan asks, is there anything we have to do?
Die. Yep, we gotta die. Probably. So we're born and we live and we die. We have to eat if we want to keep going. These are silly things that you already know. But as a practitioner, train your mind. If you're a student of mine, why would you be a student of mine if you wanted to ignore what I was saying? It's like we're talking to a nutritionist right now. Why would I ask her to help me and then ignore what she says? No, we're doing it. What she says, and she's got me jumping out of a plane with a parachute twice a week. I don't question her. She would get quite a kick out of that. So I guess I'm just saying, you don't need a teacher unless you really are ready to be a student. And you're a student. I don't have any people who are wearing robes that aren't students.
Susan asks, is music played very low during meditation ever more than distraction?
I'm not saying it couldn't be, but it's more like an underlying feather pillow. So it's kind of allows you to stay there longer because it soothes your mind. I'm not saying you shouldn't do that. Maybe you personally need to do that somewhat. Maybe the causes and conditions that are rising in your mind stream are pretty rough around the edges. So sometimes just facing that blast from the past with like an open door and a lot of wind is difficult. Sometimes you need to put the curtains on or put on a Eskimo suit. Sometimes you need to have a little bit of a buffer. So I would say as soon as you can, or even at the end of that session, try to have some time when you're doing as little as possible. Blank wall, preferably white or gray or something without much entertainment going on or distraction. Sit down, hold still as you can without being rigid. That doesn't mean maintain stillness. It just sit down, hold still, and then if your back itches, scratch your back or keep a back scratcher around. That's what this is. And take care of yourself. Pay attention to your body. You don't have to indulge in it completely, but remember that the idea is to sit very still so you can watch the movement of the mind. So if you find yourself feeling a little antsy, then try to bring a form in there that is respectful of that. So you might say, I'll sit for somewhere, you don't have to count the breath, but for 15 or 20 breaths or 100 breaths or somewhere in that area with a lot of breathing, not necessarily counting. Or maybe you have a clock that's sitting not in front of you, but off to one side that you can look at. Well, I'm going to continue to sit here for 5 more minutes before I move. Then you sit there, and then when that 5 minutes, you look over. You might continue to keep going, but the form, if you're looking at the form, then as soon as that 5 minutes is up, adjust, sit back, stretch, take a deep breath, kick out the jams, come back to that position again, and start over. Beginner's mind, start over, and start over, and 15 minutes later, and then start over. This is called training. You're training your mind, and it's not a brutal thing like I was subjected to in the Marine Corps or in certain Zen centers where I've been, where everybody has to sit like a samurai or something. This is ridiculous. Not helpful. If somebody wants to do that, then they should go to a monastery where they teach that way. So I'm not going to stop someone and say that's wrong. Maybe you need that kind of macho stuff, but I don't teach it. And as I said, I don't discourage it necessarily, but I don't think you need it. Sit down, get to know yourself. Your body, my body, anybody's body is going to be different. Mine is extremely painful especially when I was young. When I sat still, it just hurt. I didn't have any. People would say, "Oh, my mind is driving me crazy." I thought, I wish my mind would drive me crazy because I'm just in pain. Well, eventually I got my wish. Eventually my mind, when some of the pain backed off, then my mind said, "Oh, I hear I'm being called on stage."
It looks like we have exhausted the questions.
Well, it's about time.
Shall we dedicate the
I've
marriage?
exhausted my answers too. Yes, we can do that.
May the merit of this penetrate into all places so that we and every sentient being together can realize the Buddha's way. Jiho san shi ishiku shi son bu sa moko sa moko ja horomi. The 10 directions, the 3 worlds, all Buddhas, all venerable ones, Bodhisattvas, Mahasattvas, the great Prajna, Paramita. O Buddhas and Bodhisattvas of the 10 directions and the 3 times, please hear us. Please come down out of the light and protect SokukoJi Buddhist Temple Monastery, our Sangha, families, friends, and visitors. Heal everyone who is unhappy, sick, or suffering, and fill them with light.
Goodbye, my friends. You all have a pleasant evening, and look forward to seeing you again soon.